welcome to the latest MASH session. Now, one of my worries is when companies are struggling financially or when the economy is giving organisations a bit of a pasting, that some of the more important but more difficult initiatives often get put on the back burner. And a concern for me is that the big push that we've seen recently around embedding diversity and inclusion into our organisations may be one of those casualties. So today we're going to be talking about things that you can do in your organisation to ensure that that isn't the case. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome two really clever people in this sector who are also really good friends of mine. Donna Soulla to Super Lewis. Soulla, welcome. Soulla is Chief Talent Officer at The Economist, and Paul Searcy. Paul is founder and CEO of Inclusive Companies. Inclusive Companies is the UK's leading network furthering diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and also they run the awesome National Diversity Awards, and I've been lucky enough to judge there a couple of times, and we get something like, Paul, 27,000 entries into the awards.
No, 64,000 nominations this year, sorry.
Okay, so that's, well, I could tell I haven't done it for a year. That's quite incredible. So Paul, as I said at the beginning, one of the worries I have is that this initiative is getting backburnered. What are the things that you've seen in the industry? How's it behaving? What are the trends that we're seeing?
I think it's interesting. I've been in diversity for a very long time. And when I first started in diversity, it was mainly the public sector that was doing lots of great stuff with D&I. And obviously the recession happens, people have someone to blame, D&I teams go from 10 to 0, and it's not something that they want to concentrate on anymore. And then the private sector kind of mopped that up. But when the private sector mopped that up, it was very singular in strands. So they'll do lots of benchmarks, maybe for LGBT, maybe for gender or for disability, but it wasn't really inclusive of everyone. I think that's one of my bugbearers over the years, that people haven't been concentrating on diversity and inclusion for all people, because it's a simple concept. And so, and then obviously this year with COVID and teams working from home, it's looked a very different landscape than it has previously. And I was a bit worried at first because I think diversity inclusion was not on the agenda. They needed to, obviously immobilize to adapt to COVID, which is quite rightly so. But then since the death of George Floyd, it really sparked something within people to actually, this needs to be put on the agenda again. So although some companies have put it on the back burner, I think a lot of companies put it at the forefront of what they want to do now. And I'm getting more than ever inquiries about for how do we embed diversity, for senior leaders, and and it's just phenomenal that companies are really taking it on board at last. And it's not just on the black agenda; it's for inclusion as a whole.
And inclusion is a really wide net, isn't it? Are there sectors within that where you feel there's some real positive movement, and are there sectors where you feel actually we're struggling and we need, as organisations and as leaders in business, we need to have a particular focus on?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because the data suggests certain things. So when we did the Inclusive Top 50 data this year, BAME networks in previous years was like 3rd or 4th in the list. Actually, they're the most numerous now. I think lots of organisations have recognised that they need to do more in this space. But then we still hear that these BAME networks are set up and they're just listening groups, and then there's no actions with them, which we implore organisations to actually take action nowadays, and don't just listen and have an empathy ear. Actually, do your talent management, make sure the talent pipeline is there for people from BAME backgrounds. But then that also spreads out to all diversities, and so it's been phenomenal. But the one that's the least represented, and always has been, is disability. Simply because it's such a vast area, from neurodiversity to accessibility, and companies don't quite know what to do and how to handle that. And so that would be one thing that I think organisations could do a little bit better on, as regards to senior positions especially.
And you work with and showcase some of the best organisations in the country. what are the top characteristics of an absolutely spot on inclusive organisation? What are the benchmarks?
It's got to come from the top. If they, a lot of companies try to do it from middle managers. They want to. It's almost like they're being told to do it. But when the CEO really feels it and wants to embed it from the very top, that's when things really start to happen, which is crucial for success. And then when that filters down through the C-suite, down to the middle of the management, for the marketing strategies that they do, marketing themselves outside and internally, this can have a far-reaching effect, for their D&I strategies. And it doesn't have to cost the earth as well. For instance, I know Sky was the most inclusive employer last year, and they only have a small team. But the initiatives that they do, for instance, newsletters, somewhere where people can check into to voice their opinions, if they've got any concerns about diversity and inclusion, if they're being discriminated against, just doing simple initiatives like making sure people with autism are catered for, maybe within a quiet room, because they don't like, a lot of people with autism don't like loud bangs. Very simple things like that. It doesn't have to be expensive. It just needs to be, you just need to think about, what can I do to make this company more inclusive? And it's, yes, there is some things, some reasonable adjustments that you might have to do, but absolutely there's such fantastic work going out from many organizations that it's not costing the earth.
So the reality is money isn't an excuse.
Yeah.
Great.
But you do, at the same time, you do need to invest in diversity as well, because many companies are so off the mark, even with inclusive top 50 companies and inclusive companies that are members, they're in the very beginnings of their journey. Their board is still all white males. And, we shouldn't be having this conversation in 2020, moving into 2021, but we are. So I don't beat the organizations up that are having them conversations. That the fact that they're having them conversations is crucial to make change. So, yeah.
And there is a possibly an incorrect perception that it's really hard for more traditional organizations to embrace diversity and inclusion. It's very easy if you're in a sort of industries, Soulla, where you've been recently, if you're involved in those sorts of industries, it's so much easier because everyone's so much more open-minded, whereas the traditional, maybe manufacturing, it's really difficult. Is that true, or is that just a perception, Paul?
No, it's true. I think when you come to like construction and tech, women in tech, for instance, these are predominantly male-orientated jobs, or perceived to be male-orientated jobs. And I still think tech companies are really finding it hard to get young girls, ladies, women into tech. And they're doing a lot of promotion in that. But there is some headway in that. The stats say that. But it's going to take a long way before they actually catch up and have an equal footing for coders, for instance, and people that studying engineering and construction. There's a long way to go. And I think a lot of companies need to work on their language, what they use, and the rhetoric they use, making sure that any discrimination within the construction industry or anything else like that is fashioned out quite quickly.
So, Paul, from what you're saying, for us in the exhibition industry, yes, we need some investment in diversity and inclusion, but it's not going to cost you a fortune. And secondly, we are in a modern, vibrant industry. There's no excuse. So exactly. We need to get on with that. And Sue, sorry, Paul.
Sorry. So just one thing I'd like to add is that one thing that we get time and time again is, companies say, oh, we don't know how to reach these communities. We just find it so difficult. And I've known organizations that are in the middle of an Asian community and they have no Asians in their organization. I'm like, how is that hard? All you have to do is reach out to the community organizations and say, listen, we're looking for staff, and and give people the confidence that you are an inclusive employer, and market yourself that, and really believe it for every inch of the organization, and you will develop an inclusive workforce eventually.
Thank you, Paul. And then Soulla, I can see you nodding a lot here. So you and I've worked together quite a long time, actually, in various organizations, and I've seen you implement some very complex and quite difficult initiatives, all the way through to some really easy, quick wins. It'd be really good to understand some of the things that you've put in place or that you've seen work that you could advise organizations in the exhibition sector to think about. And I should add, sorry, before Soulla responds, Soulla was Chief Talent Officer, Chief People Officer at UBM. So she really understands our sector extremely well. And after that, she ran the People and Culture section at the Telegraph, and now she's at the Economist. So there's a lot of experience sitting there.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I think in terms of easy wins, the most obvious place to start is with recruitment, and we can talk a little bit about that in a moment. And as Paul said, reaching out to broader communities. But before I do that, I would just like to say, just focusing on recruitment without building an inclusive culture is just going to get you a revolving door. If you get people in, but when they arrive, they don't like what they see and they can't see any role models, and it's not an inclusive place to work, then they're just going to leave again. So I do think you need to, whilst recruitment is almost the easier one to do, you need to focus on your culture at the same time. But if we focus on recruitment for a moment, clearly it's in everyone's interest, in your business interest, to be recruiting from as broad a talent pool as possible. Why on earth wouldn't you want to use the full talent pool when you're recruiting people? And as Paul said, we miss a trick because often for years and years, we've been using the same agencies, we've been advertising in the same place, and then we're surprised that we can't reach out to people from different communities or people where you're underrepresented in your own organisation. It's made a little bit easier now because of LinkedIn and social media, where you can reach a far broader talent pool than you ever could in the past. So make the most of all the social media that's available to you when advertising. But also, as Paul said, there's lots of not-for-profit organisations out there, as well as paid-for partnerships, where there's lots of organisations focusing on particular areas. So whether it's people from a BAME background, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's people that have mental health issues, whether it's ex-offenders, there's lots of groups that you can partner with where you can advertise your roles and reach a much broader community that you probably wouldn't otherwise be reaching. So I think that's a really, really good place to start. And I think when you're doing that, do collect your data, because you need to see what's working and what isn't. So when I think of some of the partnerships we've had, we've tried advertising different levels of roles and different types of roles, and we found that some roles are not successful with those particular partnerships, but other roles are. But that's because we're collecting the data and looking at what's working and what isn't working for us. So I think those are really easy places to start. And then when you're looking at your hiring managers, again, it's no good reaching a broad talent pool, but then your managers don't know how to interview in a way that is taking out as much as possible, is challenging some of their own biases. We're all human beings. We all like to recruit in our own image. And so that's where you train managers to base their interviews on competencies and capabilities, rather than asking general questions about what somebody likes to do and what they don't like to do. And using those same questions across the board for everybody, and having objective questions rather than subjective questions is really helpful. And that requires training your managers and talking to your managers about that.
And one of the really easy wins that you taught me was, I just love this concept of blind CVs, which it costs no money. It takes someone 5 seconds to remove a name. And talking to other organisations, I know some of them go further and will remove education establishments as well, just to remove, just so you're looking purely at the competency. Are there any other really practical, easy wins? You talked about interviewing and judging on competency. Talk about how that works in practice.
So if you're looking for a salesperson in an exhibition environment, obviously it's wonderful if you can get someone that's worked in exhibitions and events and has that experience. But then when it boils down to it, when you have them in front of you in the interview process, what you're really looking for is specific capabilities around sales. And so, and if it's a high level role, can they think strategically? Ask them a question about that, but have the same questions for every person that you're interviewing, so that you're comparing like for like and marking against those specific capabilities you're looking for in that role, rather than just going with the flow of the conversation, because you come out and you've had 3 great conversations, but you don't quite know how to compare the 3 people other than, I think they'll be a good fit for the organisation, rather than actually coming out with 3 grids that say, okay, this is how they each marked against those specific questions.
And you talked a little, you said it's well done you for getting a good recruitment process in place, but it means nothing if there isn't that culture and that follow through. Can you talk a little bit about some of the easy wins there and the things that organisations should be bringing in?
Yeah, so building an inclusive culture can take years and years, will take years and years, and it's not something you just achieve, tick, and you can move on. You build over time, right? But you have to start somewhere, and it's such a vast area. But I'd say, as Paul said earlier, the biggest place to start is with your leadership team, and make sure that you've worked with them, and make sure you've got the leaders buy-in, you've got your CEOs buy-in. There's nothing more powerful than a CEO, whenever they do a town hall or whatever, talking about diversity in all its different forms. That really sends a strong, strong message out to the organisation. So making sure all of your leaders understand why we do this and are engaged with the process and buy into the process is really, really important. And then the other thing that I have found really, really useful is then going deeper into the organisation. This can't just sit in HR. And so going deeper into the organisations, one of the ways of tackling the culture is through the network groups. And we said earlier, that shouldn't just be a talking shop. That should be using your network groups, using your BAME group or your women's network to say, right, what can we do to make this an inclusive culture? What is it that makes you feel on a daily basis, feel excluded? What can we deal with? And also, they can organise their own events, organise their own lunch and learn sessions. And again, none of this needs to cost too much money, but then everybody begins to see and hear on a constant basis, you know, this is the way we do things around here. And so you're building, that way you're building it up from bottom up and also from top down. And then you can very quickly, when someone comes in new to the organisation and they see this activity, it sends very strong messages that this is really important to the organisation.
One of the things that we hear a lot is people say, I'd love to recruit a much more diverse workforce, but the reality is, well, no women apply, or no one from the sector or this culture or whatever, they just don't apply. And therefore, I'm going to stick with what I know. How do we overcome that?
So we hear that all the time, right? One of the things is what I said about connecting with organizations out there that do this for a living and so can help you reach a broader network. But the other thing is, as we said, have things in place that help with that. So for example, historically, one of the barriers to having women in senior positions has been lack of flexibility in the organisation. So women get to a point in their careers, they can be doing really, really well and being on the fast track, and then suddenly they want to have children and they get thrown off their career and there's no flexibility, and so they have to take a step back for several years whilst their male counterparts are progressing into leadership roles. If you can build in flexibility around work arrangements and everything, then you can enable women to have that balance. Historically, that's been quite difficult to do. I cannot tell you over the years the number of conversations I've had with managers who say, yeah, but if people are working from home, I won't be able to see what they're doing. And, you know, I'm not convinced they can do this job working from home. Well, how wonderful that out of the tragic circumstances of this year, one of the positives that's arisen is I am never, ever going to have another conversation with a manager in the future where the manager is going to say to me, you can't do this job working from home. So, you know, thank God that's 30 years worth of work overturned in a few months.
Impressive length we've had to go to prove the point. But
Exactly. But, you know, let's take the positives from an otherwise dreadful year.
Sorry, Soulla, go on.
Sorry, go on, Ruth.
We've been talking, Paul, about some of the management initiatives. And it's great. So a lot of the people listening to this will be in senior leadership positions. Jolly good, well done. And we've talked about the things they can do. A lot of people aren't, and actually they can't change policy or strategy. If you're as part of that wider workforce, what are the things that you can be doing that will help further these great initiatives within your organisation?
I think what I see time and time again, it's a confidence issue with a lot of people from diverse backgrounds when applying for senior roles. And what I would advise people to do is actually go out there and look for mentors within your organization and sponsors. And the difference between mentors and sponsors: mentors will guide you about what you need to do and how you can get to the next stage of your career, whereas a sponsor is actually responsible for you to get to that next stage of your career. So there's a big difference. And actually, I think some of the things that you could do is get a mentor first, and if that goes really well and they see you working really hard, then ask them to be a sponsor and be responsible for what you are. And actually get a sponsor or a mentor outside of your environment as well, which can be really crucial, because that can open up other opportunities as well, which is great. You know, make sure that you are recognized for the work that you're doing, because often I feel like a lot of managers take the credit for the work that some of their staff is doing. So make sure that people know that you are doing that piece of work and you've done it really well, because often he who shouts loudest shouts first, but that's not always the case. That's not what it should be within an organization. And I hear it time and time again that, you know, people feel left out, or often left out of the conversation, even though they're doing this great work. So I'd advise people to really stand up on 2 feet and tell people that you are doing fantastic work within the organization.
And just to build on that, Paul, I couldn't agree more. And also, from a leadership perspective, take responsibility for looking across your organization when you're promoting people and when you're doing salary increases. So when you go through your talent discussions as a leadership team, and we used to do this a lot at UBM, make sure that when you're looking at who might be promotable, you don't just put it out there and the first person that comes to you and says, it's me, I'm brilliant at my job, because there will be a lot of talent out there that's doing a fantastic job, but they're just not shouting about it. So it's your responsibility as a leader to look beyond the person that's shouting and actually look across the organization and see who's quietly doing a brilliant job and just not blowing their own trumpet. And similarly, when you're doing pay increases, salary increase times, you go through your processes, the managers make their recommendations about who should get what. But then at UBM, we always used to sit down as a leadership team, and I would sit down with the CFO and the CEO and go through it and say, right, where are there patterns emerging here of inequality? Where has someone been left behind? Because again, it's often the person that shouts loudest that gets the salary increase, and it's our responsibilities as leaders to make sure that doesn't happen.
Brilliant.
Can I just add to that as well? So we could go on, but you know, I think one important thing is CEOs know the lived experience of their staff. I've been to lots of networks where, you know, people have said, well, I've been for this job, I've not got it, I've been here 20 years. And when that network says it in front of their CEO or the chief executive or the senior leadership, they tend to listen a whole lot more, you know, recognize that your network can have power, invite your senior leaders to them so that they know the lived experience of their staff, because until that, you know, not much will change. And you're exactly right, you know, the culture has to change within an organization as well. That's crucial. But yeah, the lived experience is the thing I want to get out there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. I think that's been love this issue of, there's some real practical, tactical things, but there's also some big cultural things. And I think, Paul, your point at the beginning was, why would you exclude a percentage of your workforce just because they simply don't look like you? And you know, in order for us to get our businesses back on track and to see our economy booming again, we're going to need all hands on deck, and we're going to need every trick in the book. So thank you very much to Paul and to Soulla for sharing their experiences. And thank you very much to everyone for joining us here today, and look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you.